She cried for help in a life-threatening moment, but her parents were too busy raising their glasses to celebrate her brother's success, and then she vanished from their lives in a way no one ever saw coming. So what really happened after that night? Stay with us for this emotional story packed with depth, heartbreak, and an unforgettable twist. Rachel had just turned 27. She was an ER nurse at a major hospital in Austin, Texas. The job wasn't glamorous. No one clapped when she finished a shift, but it made her feel useful, at least to the patients clutching her hand in panic. Rachel came from a well-off, traditional family. They lived in Westlake Hills, a quiet, clean neighborhood where neighbors actually knew each other's names. Her dad had worked in finance and retired early. Her mom ran a small interior design shop, but always claimed she was mostly a stay-at-home mom. Truth was, she was mostly a mom to one person, Jared, Rachel's older brother. Jared was 4 years older than Rachel. He used to be the high school football team's quarterback, then went on to study economics and had a skyrocketing career in real estate. How successful that actually was, Rachel wasn't sure. She just knew that in her parents' eyes, Jared was the flawless upgrade to every family expectation. Even now, the Turners, the neighbors to the left, still brought up Jared's graduation speech like it was some kind of milestone for the whole neighborhood. And Rachel? She didn't cause any trouble, never got expelled, didn't have messy boyfriends, didn't owe anyone money, and that was enough. Whenever she tried to open up about something, her mom would say things like, "Girls just need stability, sweetie. No need to pressure yourself like your brother." On the surface, it sounded like reassurance, but underneath, it felt more like a subtle way to shut her down. She had never once heard her parents say, "We're proud of you," to her. With Jared, it happened almost every week. Family dinners, the one thing that was supposed to feel the most familiar, were where Rachel felt the most out of place. Even when she came home for the holidays, the conversation always circled back to whatever project Jared was investing in, which potential client was calling, and how he was such a bright kid. He could tell different types of screws apart when he was only 3. A story she'd heard at least 6 times in her life. Once, Rachel was in the middle of telling them about a tough emergency case, a little boy going into anaphylactic shock, and how she had to stay calm and take charge because there was no lead doctor available. Right when she was getting to the critical part, her mom cut in. "Jared, do you want apple juice or orange?" Rachel looked down at her plate. She didn't say anything else. Jared went with orange. No one meant to hurt her. At least no one admitted to it. But the years of being overlooked had piled up, and eventually it just became Rachel's default. She didn't say much, didn't text often, didn't volunteer stories about her job or her life. Every call home felt more like a check-in box to tick, just to do her part. The truth was, she still tried. She kept in touch, still bought holiday gifts, because, after all, it was family. At least, that's what she used to believe. The breaking point came when Jared announced he was launching his own real estate investment firm, a move toward true independence that the whole family treated like a national event. Her parents FaceTimed her just to show off Jared's new office, sent photos of the ribbon-cutting ceremony complete with wine glasses, a custom backdrop, and a speech that, according to her dad, was worthy of an economics textbook. Rachel got an invitation too, elegantly printed, with a line that read, "Family is the foundation of success." She read it and set it down. It wasn't jealousy. It was just that she had never truly felt like part of that foundation. At one of the gatherings, Jared's friends filled the living room wall to wall. She tried to ask him a few questions about his future plans, but her voice was drowned out by the toasts and someone joking, "Is Jared the hottest single CEO in the state or what?" She forced a smile, then excused herself and left early. On the way home, her car passed the hospital where she worked. Night shift, cold, stressful, but it was the one place where Rachel didn't feel invisible. Rachel was never one to complain. She chose medicine because she wanted to help people at their worst, not to be noticed, not for praise. Overnight shifts that bled into morning, back-to-back emergencies, the sound of ambulance sirens became a steady background beat in her mind. For nearly a month straight, her schedule had been brutally tight. 12-hour shifts, some nights without dinner, sometimes barely managing 10 minutes of rest on a plastic chair outside the on-call room. Rachel started to feel that something wasn't right. Sharp, fleeting chest pains like someone was squeezing her rib cage, then letting go. One time, while administering fluids to a car accident patient, her head suddenly spun and her vision blurred for a second. She gripped the edge of the table, kept her voice steady so the patient wouldn't notice. Only one thought ran through her mind: don't be weak. At the hospital, people praised her as the most reliable on the team. Never complained, never needed backup. And Rachel wore that reputation like armor. Armor doesn't get to crack. Her apartment was just big enough for one: a twin bed, a small kitchen, an old bookshelf, soft yellow lighting. She liked the quiet. No one asked what she was thinking. No one interrupted her with, "What would you like to drink?" But silence was also the place where no one noticed if she collapsed. That night, Rachel got home a little after 1 a.m. after a shift that ran longer than usual. It was drizzling outside, her hair damp and cold, her jacket stained with dried blood from a head trauma case she hadn't had time to change out of. She stepped into the kitchen, meaning to make a cup of tea. Then the pain hit. Sudden, sharp, worse than any of the times before. She dropped to her knees, one hand bracing against the cold tile floor, her body trembling. The chest pain spread to her left shoulder, then down her arm. Sweat poured from her skin like she'd just stepped out of a shower, but her hands and feet were ice cold. Rachel lay on her side, gasping, trying to focus. She reached for her phone on the table. Her fingers were shaking so badly, she couldn't unlock the screen on the first try. After a few seconds scrolling through names, she tapped on Mom. In that moment, she didn't think. It was just instinct. Her mom had always been the first person she called when she was scared. "Rachel, why are you calling me at this hour? I'm at Jared's launch party. Call your father," her mom said, her voice cutting through the background noise. Laughter, clinking glasses, someone speaking into a mic. Rachel struggled to get the words out. "Mom, my chest. I can't breathe. You're always worrying too much. I'm really busy right now. Don't make a big deal out of it." "Call your father," her mom said. The line clicked as the call was forwarded. Rachel dialed her dad. One ring, then he picked up. "What is it?" "Jared's about to give his speech. I'm not okay, I think. Heart attack." "What? You're breaking up, I can't hear. Look, talk later. Call an ambulance if you have to." His voice was rushed, and then the line went dead. Rachel stared at the phone screen. The pain kept crashing in like waves, harder each time. She tried to dial 911, but her fingers were numb. The screen blurred. She couldn't see the numbers clearly. The phone slipped from her hand. Everything turned into chaos. Her ears rang, her heartbeat pounded like a drum in her chest. She tried to drag herself toward the door, using her elbow, each breath feeling like a knife slicing through her ribs. Her hand searched for the doorknob but couldn't reach it. The edges of her vision began to go dark. A knock at the door. She couldn't tell if it was real or imagined. Then the door creaked open, not forcefully but slow and cautious. "Rachel?" A man's voice, gravelly but clear. She heard hurried footsteps, then felt a hand on her shoulder. "Jesus, Rachel, can you hear me?" It was Eli, the neighbor next door. Over 70, widowed, the kind of man who watered his plants at the same time every morning and always greeted her with, "Out late again, huh?" His hands trembled as he called 911, watching her body grow colder by the minute, her lips trying to form words that never made it out. Rachel didn't remember much after that. Just that, in the blur, there was a hand holding hers. Not to pull her up, but simply to keep her from slipping all the way down. The last sound she remembered was the wail of an ambulance in the distance, mixed with Eli's voice talking to the dispatcher, shaky but firm. Everything after that was fragments. Bright lights, someone calling her name, the jolt of the stretcher as it passed through the elevator doors. No clear emotions, just one thing, cold, stretching from her skin down to her bones, and a hollow ache when she realized her family wasn't there. The ambulance arrived 8 minutes after Eli's call. The doctor said if it had been just 10 minutes later, Rachel might have been facing a lifetime of complications, or worse, might not have woken up at all. The heart attack was mild, but enough to leave her body drained. And more importantly, it didn't happen at work or out on the street. It happened at home. The one place that was supposed to be safe. Rachel woke up the next morning in the recovery room. Her head still foggy, her body felt pinned down by an invisible weight. She turned her head to the side and noticed a bouquet on the table next to her bed. Simple, unpretentious, just a few stems of white chrysanthemums and lavender tied with a thin cream-colored ribbon. No card. No name. No sign of who had brought it. The nurse came in to check her blood pressure. Seeing Rachel awake, she smiled and said, "Your neighbor brought the flowers. He said if it weren't for him, no one would have known you were lying there." Rachel didn't say anything. She looked at the bouquet again, stayed quiet for a moment. She couldn't believe it. Not because Eli cared, that strangely made perfect sense, but because there was no one else. Not a single message, not one call. No mom, no dad, no one in her family thought to ask if she was alive or dead. 3 days in the hospital passed in silence. The nurses came in regularly to check her vitals. Her meds were on schedule, but no one else walked through that door. No knock. No "Rachel, how are you?" No familiar footsteps. She had thought, hoped, that her mom would at least call. If not the first day, then maybe the second. But her phone stayed still on the table, lighting up only with bank notifications or doctor's appointment reminders. On the morning of the third day, Rachel made the video call herself. She had to, because if she waited, no one would be on the other end of the line. Her mom picked up after a few rings. The image popped up, the familiar kitchen, lights on, a new flower arrangement, a salad plate in hand. Her mom was mid-bite on a cherry tomato when she glanced at the screen. "Rachel, you look fine. I thought it was something serious," her mom said. "You always worry too much." Rachel opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. She watched her mom keep picking at her salad, dabbing her lips with a napkin, then turning to someone off-screen in the kitchen. "Jared, do you want more lemonade?" Rachel glanced over at the table where Eli's bouquet still sat. The flowers had started to wilt slightly at the edges, but they still looked more gentle, more thoughtful than any question her mother had asked. She reached out and ended the call. Said nothing more. In that moment, everything became crystal clear. It wasn't that her mother didn't love her. It was just that the love, if it ever existed, had never been strong enough to make her leave the table or set the plate down. She understood now. To them, she was just the blurred background in Jared's picture. And when that background started to crack, they didn't even turn around. Rachel lay back and pulled the blanket up to her shoulders. For the first time in 3 days, she fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. As if even her body had finally accepted that, from now on, it would have to take care of itself. Rachel returned to her old apartment on an early morning, a few days after being discharged. Everything was exactly as she'd left it. The kettle still had water in it, dishes sat in the sink, her shoes were tipped over by the door, waiting for her to keep going. But Rachel knew the version of herself from a few days ago had fallen to that floor and stayed there. She was no longer the person who would whisper "it's fine" and carry on like nothing happened. She didn't tell her coworkers. She didn't notify her boss. On her first night back home, she printed her resignation letter. Not because she didn't love the work anymore, but because she couldn't return to that old armor. The nurse who never complained, always showed up, always stayed strong. That strength had nearly killed her. She knew that if she stayed, she'd keep ignoring the signs, keep convincing herself that someone else needs me more. 3 days later, she packed only what she needed and left Austin. No goodbyes, no farewells, no note. She rented a small apartment in a quiet suburb up north, nearly 2 hours from the city. The neighborhood was peaceful, shared lawn, big windows, and nobody knew anybody's name. That made her feel safe. With the savings she'd built up from years of skipped vacations, minimal shopping, and not spending on holidays like everyone else, Rachel enrolled in an online graphic design course. It was an old passion, something she used to sketch quietly in her notebooks back in middle school. She had once thought about studying art, but her mom had shut it down with a single line. "You're planning to make a living drawing posters? Art doesn't pay. Be practical." So she became a nurse, safe, stable, and slowly drifted away from what she really wanted. Now it was different. No one controlled her choices. No one gave side comments or chuckled behind her back. She was learning for herself, not to impress anyone, not to prove a point. The first few lessons overwhelmed her. After years without touching anything creative, it felt like starting from zero. But for the first time, she could actually breathe on her own. The first month was rough. Rent, tuition, groceries, every dollar was calculated down to the cent. Rachel picked up remote part-time work, editing documents, data entry, anything she could do at night. Days were for studying, nights for working, and in between, she practiced sketching, retraining hands that had forgotten the feel of a pencil. She lost weight. Her eyes were shadowed with fatigue. But for the first time in years, her mind felt clear. No more night shifts. No more sitting at the family dinner table, feeling invisible. Every morning, Rachel woke up early, brewed coffee, opened her laptop, and chose for herself what to learn that day. No one interrupted her mid-sentence. No one asked what Jared wanted to drink. Everything seemed to be behind her now, until one evening, while checking her email, a text popped up from her mother's number. "Sweetie, Jared just ran into trouble with a big deal. He's really stressed. Can you send him some money to help him through this? Just a few thousand. You're doing okay, right?" Rachel stared at the message. Her fingers froze above the keyboard. And suddenly, a wave of old emotions came rushing back. Those days alone in the hospital, Eli's flowers, the video call with her mom eating salad. It all returned, sharp and vivid, like it had just happened yesterday. She wasn't angry. She wasn't sad. She just couldn't find a reason to respond the way they expected anymore. She typed slowly, one word at a time, as if to make sure she really meant what she was about to say. "I can't help the people who once left me to die alone on my kitchen floor." Then she hit send, shut off her phone, didn't wait for a reply. It felt weightless, like she had finally cut the last thread, pulling her back to the past. She was no longer the child who needed to call home for validation. No longer waiting for approval from someone who didn't care enough to ask if she was still alive. And no longer the silent shadow beside someone else's spotlight. She was her own. And that was enough. The final message Rachel sent felt like a door quietly closing. After that, there were no more texts from her mother. No calls, no requests, not even an explanation. She hadn't expected anything, and maybe for the first time in her life, she felt fully free. Every evening, after finishing her remote work, Rachel joined a 2-hour online design class focused on 3D modeling techniques. The class was small, mostly filled with career changers or people trying to upskill. No one really asked personal questions. The instructor was Mark, a man in his 30s with light brown hair that always seemed a little tousled at the back of his neck, and a voice that was deep and calm. He wasn't flashy, but whenever he explained something, the whole class seemed to slow down. No rush, no pressure, no judgment. Rachel noticed that Mark had a remarkable memory for names. He called her Rachel T. to distinguish her from the other Rachel in class, and he always checked in, but in a way that never made her feel spotlighted. "Was that section tricky for you? Or want me to go over that again?" They started talking more after class. The conversations never dug into the past, never pressed on old wounds. Mark never asked what she used to do or why she was learning design at this stage in life. Instead, he'd ask what she thought about a particular color palette, or how it felt to build her first animated model. Simple, present, safe. And for the first time in any relationship, Rachel felt like she didn't have to prove anything. She didn't need to be better or impressive or overly careful. She just had to be herself. The person still learning, the one whose hands sometimes trembled while presenting in class. And Mark was still there, listening, nodding, offering gentle feedback when it mattered. A few months later, they started dating. Quietly. No big announcements, no photos, no need to make it official. They simply walked together after class, sometimes picking up toasted sandwiches from a nearby food cart, then eating them in comfortable silence. Once, Rachel asked, "Aren't you curious about me?" Mark smiled. "I figure if there's something you want to share, you will." Mark had a daughter, Ellie, 8 years old. Rachel had known that early on, but she didn't meet Ellie right away. Mark had told her he didn't bring people into his daughter's world unless he was sure. That made Rachel feel no pressure. If anything, it made her respect him even more as a father. The first time she met Ellie was on a Saturday afternoon when Rachel came over to help fix a glitchy 3D printer. Ellie opened the door, hair tied off center, holding a still wet highlighter in one hand. She looked at Rachel for a few seconds, then asked, "Are you Rachel T?" Rachel laughed and nodded. "Dad says you're the best at color matching in your class." Rachel wasn't great with kids, or at least, that's what she used to think. But Ellie wasn't like the children she'd dealt with during vaccine rounds or in the ER. She was talkative, but never loud. Curious, but never invasive. After lunch, Ellie brought out a coloring book into the living room, plopped down on the floor and waved. "Rachel, will you sit with me?" Rachel sat, still unsure what to say or do, when Ellie suddenly asked, "Rachel, why does your smile look sad?" There was no judgment in the question, just an honest observation, startling in its clarity. Rachel looked at her, started to answer, then didn't. She simply nodded. And Ellie, like it was the most natural thing in the world, wrapped her arms gently around Rachel's back. Not tightly, not for long, but just enough for Rachel to feel her heart skip a beat. In her entire life, no child had ever hugged her when she hadn't done anything. No one had ever done that when she was simply quiet. Since that day, Rachel started stopping by Mark's place more often. No schedule, no plan. Just after class, instead of heading straight home, she'd drop in, help Mark cook, hang out with Ellie, or simply sit on the couch while the three of them watched a cartoon together. Rachel grew attached to the father and daughter, not out of obligation, not because of some unspoken pressure or the idea that she needed to fill in for Ellie's missing mom. She stayed because it was peaceful. Because sitting between the two of them, she didn't have to hold anything in. She didn't have to fight to be heard. And no one told her to call someone else if it's serious. That afternoon, sunlight stretched gently across the backyard lawn. Not too bright, not too dim, just enough to make everything feel calm, like the way Rachel had been living for the past year. The wooden chairs were arranged in 2 short rows, about 8 people per side. A small white fabric arch stood at the front, adorned with real vines and paper lanterns. There was no loud music, no band. Just Ellie, reading aloud a short poem she had written, her voice weaving in and out of birdsong in the distance. Rachel stood beside Mark, hand in hand, wearing a soft cream dress she'd picked from a small shop in the neighboring town. Mark wasn't in a tuxedo, just a white shirt, a light gray vest, and a wedding ring tucked in his pocket. They didn't want anything too formal, just enough to remember, and enough for the people who truly mattered to be there. Eli sat in the front row. His suit was old but freshly pressed. He sat upright, his eyes glowing with quiet joy as he watched Rachel step out of the house. Next to him sat Ellie, wearing a pale blue dress, holding a small basket of flowers, her smile wider than the sky. As Rachel walked past, Ellie tilted her head and whispered, "You look like a princess." Rachel smiled, gently tightened her grip on Mark's hand. There were no relatives from Rachel's side, not a single familiar face from the days when she still carried the Turner name, not because they were busy, but because they hadn't been invited. Rachel felt no need to explain. She didn't think she owed anyone a notice. Her life had taken a different path, and the people from the past had never stayed long enough to witness the journey. Mark was the one who gave the short speech. His voice was deep and steady, just like always, but his eyes held a quiet emotion he couldn't hide. "Not everyone you're born to is family," he said, "but the ones who stay when you need them, the ones who don't walk away, don't ask questions, don't make you prove your worth, they're the ones who are." Rachel smiled through tears, not from a fleeting wave of emotion, but from memories rising all at once. She remembered the cold of that kitchen floor, the nameless bouquet, the first time Ellie hugged her for no reason at all. And now, standing in the backyard, surrounded by people who had chosen to stay, with no obligation, no expectations, she knew she had found her family. After the ceremony, there was no big reception. Just a few tables lined up along the back porch, plates of baked goods, salad, and fruit juice. Ellie ran around with a few classmates, while Eli chatted with a new neighbor about gardening. Rachel didn't have to host anyone, didn't have to keep up appearances. She just had to be herself, and that was enough. The months that followed passed gently. Rachel continued her remote design work, sometimes teaming up with Mark on small creative projects. But most of her time was spent on the little things. Waking up early to make milk for Ellie, tying her hair before school, grocery shopping with Mark on weekends, trying out new recipes they'd printed and taped to the fridge. Every night after Ellie had gone to bed, Rachel would lie against Mark's shoulder, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing. Sometimes, neither of them said a word. But Rachel felt full, like the empty corners of her heart, neglected for so long, had finally been filled with things that were kind, slow, and real. She no longer had to call just to feel cared for, no longer had to tiptoe around her own words or bury the sad parts for fear they'd be ignored. Every feeling, no matter how small, was seen and welcomed. Sometimes, Rachel thought about the word family. It used to mean duty, effort without return. Now it meant something else entirely. To her, family was the feeling of walking into a room and knowing, without doubt, that you didn't have to fake a smile. It was being understood, even in silence. It was being held, not because you did something right, but simply because you were there. And for Rachel, family was Ellie. It was Mark. It was Eli. It was everyone who chose to stay. Rachel didn't need anyone to validate that truth. She had spent too many years waiting for the wrong people to nod in approval. Now, every morning she opened her eyes to Ellie's smile, to Mark clumsily making coffee in the kitchen. She knew. She had been right to leave, and even more right to never look back. Because sometimes, you have to get completely lost to finally find the place you truly belong. Rachel never imagined happiness could be this quiet. It wasn't a grand moment or someone swooping in to save her from her own life. It was built from small choices, quiet courage, like submitting a resignation letter, choosing not to reply to a message, or sitting down to color with an 8-year-old girl. Sometimes, we're not lacking love. We're just in the wrong place for love to exist honestly. And once you find that place, where you don't have to toughen up, don't have to prove yourself, and don't have to sacrifice just to be allowed in, you'll know. You finally come home. What about you? Have you ever felt out of place within your own family? Have you ever had to walk away in order to find yourself again? Share your story in the comments. We're always here to listen. If this story touched something in you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you won't miss the next chapter in our journey through love, family, and the courage it takes to come home to yourself. Thank you for staying with us till the end.